This is Lisa from Mobile Tech Review, and it's Zenbook time. We've done several Asus Zenbook models. This is the latest, greatest, available for fall of 2014. This is the Asus Zenbook UX303 LA. There's also an LN model. We'll talk about that one as well. But what's nice about it, the usual really lovely spun metal finish, metal everywhere, exquisite build, down to only $899 now for the Core i5 model with 8 gigs of RAM. And you got stuff that you can upgrade inside, which is pretty neat for an Ultrabook too. We're going to look at it now. Well, here it is, pretty as ever. Nobody can ever say the Zenbook line isn't pretty. It is one of the prettiest Ultrabooks on the planet. And we've looked at many generations of this, from the first Ultrabook Asus ever made all the way to today. And honestly, they keep learning from consumer feedback. They keep getting better, and this is really a very nice machine. And the prices even come down to, you remember when an Ultrabook from Asus was $1,000 and then even higher depending on the configuration? Well, this Core i5 with 8 gigs of RAM and 128 gig SSD is $899, and you get a full HD wide gamut touchscreen for the price as well. Nice. Very nice. Full metal design, obviously spun kind of finish lid here that Asus is so fond of, and see, you can use it to do signals and things like that. It's pretty neat. It is what they call smoky brown. I really don't see much brown in this, so those of you who are worried, because they have had some brown models before that frankly were kind of brown and not my favorite, and some of you are a little bit worried about that. This is really kind of, it's a complex kind of finish, honestly, but I would just call this a kind of mid silver, not even quite dark, a little bit, you know, it picks up whatever colors it's going to reflect. Slightly warm tones on there, but that's about it. Anyway, it's very nice looking. Typical of the Zenbook line, 13.3-inch Ultrabook. Really nice attention to detail. All the seams fit together perfectly. Gives you that unibody aluminum feel. Of course, the bottom panel actually is removable. This is not like it's actually cast out of one single piece of aluminum. Some parts have to come off. They have to get the guts in there somehow, don't they? Tapered design, about 0.7 inches thick at its thickest. Nice little curves over here. No sharp edges anywhere. And plenty of ports for an Ultrabook too. That's another thing. Ultrabooks used to be so constrained on ports. And here we have our full-size SD card slot. We have 2 USB 3.0 ports. They're not color-coded because in this case they are all USB 3.0 ports. And on the flip side, wait, there's more. See? Full-size HDMI, not that micro HDMI connector that you used to use, so you don't need a fitty little dongle adapter to keep with you. Usual 3.5 millimeter combo audio jack. Another USB 3.0 port, so that's, you got 3 total right there. And a mini display port. That's the charging port. So, and it still uses that square, compact Asus kind of charger with the thin cord that comes out of it. But anyway, lots of ports here. Very nice job, Asus. And all in all, feels good, feels rigid. This is not going to be a bend gate machine. So the bottom here, this aluminum panel is removable. We have ventilation on the bottom. This is a Core i5 4th generation Intel Haswell CPU. It does require fan and ventilation. Rubber feet there, a whole bunch of torque screws. And we're going to talk about how to take this apart later so you can upgrade the internals. But anyway, you have to undo all the torque screws here, take off these 2 rubber feet, and then you'll have access to the internals. So let's look inside the machine. So when we open it up, it looks again a lot like Zenbooks of years past. Metal deck right here, roomy trackpad, Asus's own drivers. Again, you know, it works pretty well. I don't have any complaints other than the fact that the surface is pretty slippery, pretty slick. I like a little bit more resistance to add control, especially when doing multi-touch gestures, which it obviously supports well. We have just made the screen really teeny there. Keyboard, backlit keyboard, and Asus's backlighting is actually pretty intelligent. I've had a lot of laptops where you're a pretty bright room and the backlighting turns on. This one actually doesn't do that. But once it starts getting dim, the sun starts setting, you have natural lighting going on, it will turn on. You can actually control it with the space bar or with the FN and the A key right here. You've got your multimedia controls along the top row for brightness, volume, all of that sort of thing. But the keyboard, really nice to type on. It might not have those Lenovo sculpted smile-shaped keys, but it's just, I used this to type a review last night, and it really is just very responsive, very nice. Pretty good key travel, too. And the keys are damped nicely, so they don't rattle, click, that sort of thing. Very, very nice keyboard to type on. Asus has generally done pretty well with that, and I have to say I think they've got it their best yet. When you're typing, there is no trample leaning. This is all rigid metal here. If you press hard, you can get a little bit of movement. And the way the machine is architected, since you can open it up and access the internal components, there's actually a little more room in here. So when you're typing, you might hear a slight hollow, echoey sound, just very vaguely from the body, which is different from previous Zenbooks. Nothing that I worry about, but just, well, you'll notice the difference. You got air intakes along the display seam as ever, and this is just a straight laptop with a, well, it's a touch screen, sure, but it doesn't go any further back than this if we turn it like so. It doesn't go into yoga mode, it doesn't go into tablet mode, it doesn't come apart into pieces like the Asus T300 or something like that. So this is just for somebody who wants a traditional laptop design. It runs Windows 8.1 64-bit, does have the touch interface like I said, but no tablet functionality here whatsoever. Inside here we have the Intel Core i5-4210U. That's the latest modest iteration of the U series Intel Haswell 4th generation CPUs. Some markets you may be able to get it with an i7. Here in the US we're pretty much looking at the i5 version with the full HD touch screen on it. Overseas there's a 1600 by 900 non-touch matte panel available that is TN and not IPS. This is IPS, so great viewing angles, great color. We're going to talk about the display in detail a bit more. This is the one that I would opt for. While we're talking about display now, there's the UX303 LN. This is the LA model. The LN model goes for about $12.99. Now I've seen some retailers marking it up because it's kind of hard to find. Outside it looks the same chassis, all that sort of thing, but the difference with the UX303LN is that it adds NVIDIA GT840M dedicated graphics with 2 gigs of VRAM. Now that is an entry to mid or just below mid-level GPU or graphics processor. That'll give you a little bit of oomph to make some games more playable. It's not going to beat out Alienware or anything like that, or even some of Asus's bigger sort of ultrabooks with, say, GT850 or better dedicated graphics there, but it's enough to take a game like Skyrim from, playing at, relatively speaking, low resolutions like 1366 by 768 and lower settings and getting maybe 30 frames per second and moving it up to where you can go one resolution level higher or maybe even move up to 40 frames per second, 45 maybe, depending on the game. You get the idea. So it's a nice little boost if you're doing video editing. It can help a little bit there. That one also has the Quad HD display, so even higher resolution there. Now, as we've learned, this 3200 by 1800 display, that's been a little bit of a double-edged sword because Windows 8.1 doesn't handle scaling of resolutions real well. Pretty much it's going to double up on resolution there to make things readable so everything's not too tiny on the screen. Yeah, okay. So you start to wonder what's the point. And then the other thing is it's the Samsung PLS panel that was used on the Lenovo Yoga 2 Pro and also the Samsung ATIBook 9 Plus. Nice enough panel, good color gamut, all that sort of thing, but the yellows look more mustardy on that. Now firmware can help that also. It seems to drop your battery levels though, because driving those yellows to brightness, well, it uses a lot of power. So for those of you who just think, I don't want yellows that look like mustard, my SpongeBob should be bright yellow, think about it again. The last thing is you're going to have a drop in battery life and an increase in heat with the dedicated graphics. So for those of you who just want a straight Ultrabook, modern state-of-the-art Ultrabook power with Intel HD 4400 integrated graphics, the Core i5, and a decent $899 price tag, certainly the UX303LA has its appeal. The UX303LN certainly is interesting, one of the very few Ultrabooks on the market that actually has dedicated graphics, for example. And it brings to mind the old UX32VD, if you remember that, which was the last time Asus gave us a pretty neat machine that has some dedicated graphics and upgradable internals. The choice is yours. The LA model is easier to find, and you'll get cooler running, better battery life, and display scaling that makes a little bit more sense. 1920 by 1080 Windows handles decently well. So how about the display on this guy? It's certainly an attractive display. It is a glossy display. Sorry, matte touchscreens are pretty much a rare thing, I think, because glossy is easier to clean. Also, it's Gorilla Glass 3, goes along with the robust metal chassis. This should be one of the harder notebooks to actually harm if you're the klutzy sort. Windows 8.1 here with our great live tile UI. Depends if you like that or not, of course. Normal desktop right there, and I have it at 125% scaling right now. I think things are pretty darn viewable and good. Now I'm going to show you something right here. Remember Asus Splendid, for those of you who've used that before on an Asus model? I have it set at normal. By default, it's set to vivid, just so you can see what vivid looks like. It amps up the blues, makes them particularly stronger. There it goes. See that? That just kicked in now. We're talking crazy little super AMOLED moment there. And increases the contrast a bit more. I'm going for normal. Now, Asus makes a big deal of this because they talk about their great calibration and color coverage. And sometimes Asus have come pretty weirdly calibrated before, particularly the sharp IGZO display we saw on the UX301 high-resolution model. So, well, they're actually really doing a good job here. Use the Spider 4 Pro colorimeter, which is a hardware-software combination on the display, and set at normal mode. The calibrated versus factory normal setting were indistinguishable. They were that close. So out of the box, very nice color calibration. Also, good color gamut, as we've seen on the higher-end Ultrabooks these days with full HD or better displays. And there you can see we have 96% of sRGB. That's pretty darn good. %, of Adobe RGB. Again, that for the higher end, better displays, that's par for the course. It's good to see here that combined with the calibration means those of you who do photo and video editing will probably be pretty pleased with this machine. Now, brightness, Asus claims this is a 300 nit display, which would be pretty good, but we actually measured it significantly over at 344. Generally, when we measure this with the colorimeter, the numbers are often lower than what the manufacturer says by a little bit, not higher. So that's impressive. That puts it up there with the ThinkPad Yoga for around this size kind of ultra-booky machines, and this has much wider color gamut, so quite attractive there. Same 6:41 contrast ratio that we've seen on several panels, and the black points, they're pretty good. We got a 0.54 right there, so that's not bad at all. So yes, lovely display. The SSD that came inside of ours is a SanDisk X110, and you can see the numbers here. Again, pretty par for the course. 4K writes often are lower than anything else, so that's just fine. The beautiful thing about this machine is, unlike most Ultrabooks where maybe you have an mSATA SSD, which is still a little harder to find, and soldered on RAM, you have 4 gigs of RAM soldered to the motherboard and one standard SO-DIMM slot. Takes 1600 megahertz, 1.35 volt RAM. So you can go up to 12 gigs. Our machine has a 4 gig DIMM in the slot plus the 4 gigs on board for 8 gigs total. And the SSD drive on this is a standard 2.5-inch SATA drive, 7mm height, the usual slim SSD drive. So you can upgrade this as you see fit. And also there is an mSATA SSD slot that is unoccupied. Looks like Asus is using that for caching drives, because some versions of this are actually available with a conventional spinning hard drive, and then it has a caching SSD. Probably the BIOS is not going to allow you to use the mSATA slot as the primary drive, but honestly, with the 2.5-inch bay, really there's not a whole lot of motivation. And these days, SSDs have gotten relatively inexpensive. You can get a Samsung Evo 250 gig for around $130 or so if you want to upgrade on this guy. In terms of speed, this is full Windows 64-bit. It feels perfectly responsive. Obviously, it works with touch just fine, works with the trackpad. So how about our benchmark numbers? PC Mark 7, it scored 4879. That's pretty standard for a Core i5 4th generation Haswell CPU. W Prime computed Pi in 22.48 seconds. Geekbench 3, 2739 single core, 5259 multi-core. Now, some of you have heard about the Zenbook UX305 that Asus showed off at the IFA show in Berlin, and maybe it'll be here by maybe November of this year, maybe a little later, shopping season kind of thing. That's going to use the new Intel Core M CPU. That's probably going to be the Y series, Broadwell, next generation. As you know, with the mobile CPUs, the Y is the lowest power and the slowest. Then we have the U, which is the Ultrabook CPU, and then the M, which is the full mobile for really bigger laptops. So performance increase, you're not going to see that much there with that, but battery life is going to be a lot better. Again, Intel's really working hard on battery life, but so the UX305 doesn't so far claim to have even higher battery life than this, which is claimed at 8 hours. And now that's for the LA model with integrated graphics. Keep that in mind. That's because a lot of manufacturers like Asus for the UX305, Lenovo for the Yoga 3 Pro, instead are going for even thinner and lighter. So they're cutting down on the size and weight of the battery to give you something more portable rather than increasing battery life runtimes. You get the idea. So, there it is. The UX305 will also have a quad HD display option, probably a little bit more higher end, expensive. Honestly, compute power-wise and battery life-wise, given that this has the bigger battery in it, this is going to work out just as well. It is going to be a little heavier, 3.2 pounds. The UX305, like the Yoga 3 Pro, it should come in at around 2.6 pounds. So if that a little over half a pound makes a difference to you, keep that in mind. Otherwise, if you need a laptop now, you need a laptop now. And I have to say, this is one of the nicer laptops on the market right now if you're looking for an Ultrabook. But we're going to check out the internals before we say goodbye to you guys. And instead of just plopping in a still photo with some labels on it, we're actually going to take it apart in front of your eyes and show you exactly what everything is in here. Because, again, so unusual about this is that you can upgrade the RAM, you can upgrade the SSD drive, you have access to the internals, the Intel Wi-Fi 802.11ac card that's included here. You could upgrade that too, but right now that's pretty much as good as it gets, so I don't know what you would actually want to upgrade it to. Also has the usual combo with Bluetooth 4.0. Notice this does not have Ethernet built in on all the lovely ports that we have on this machine, but you could use a USB Ethernet adapter on this if you needed it. Plenty of USB ports for that. Okay, so now we have it open. How did we do that? Here's the cover first off. This is the inside view of the obviously metal cover. Well, we unscrewed a whole bunch of teeny Torx T5 screws right here. See how small that is? Don't lose them. Now, one thing I'll tell you about this little pile of screws, one of these things is not like the other things. One screw is considerably longer, this one right here. And that's the one that goes in the center position up top by the hinge. So make sure you pay attention to that when you put it back together again. And it's not just taking off the Torx screws. Unfortunately, you actually have to take off the rubber feet. I really hate it when they do this. These things are glued on maniacally well right here and here. I had to pull the feet off. Now, one of them actually did rip a little bit too. Usually these things are pretty sturdy, and I used my pretty adequate fingernail here. But I got a little tear in it, so you're going to have to pry your way around because the adhesive is pretty super strong. It is also reusable. To take the feet off to access then two Phillips head screws here. Gee, thanks, Asus. Anyway, once you get the cover off, not too bad. What's inside here? The upgradable Ultrabook. Here we have our standard SATA drive. In this case, this one came with 128 gig SanDisk X110 SSD drive. 128 gig. Here we have Wi-Fi 802.11ac card made by Intel. That's a PCIe standard connector. And this is a RAM slot right here. Yay. Now that's the really nifty thing. Ultrabooks just never have upgradable RAM. Once in a while, you can upgrade the SSD. Often they're MSATA or something like that, not a standard mini notebook style hard drive right here, but one RAM slot. There's 4 gigs of RAM soldered on the motherboard and one slot. So you can go with an 8 gig stick if you want to bring this up to 12 gigs, or from the factory, as you can see, we have a 4 gig standard DIMM in here, 1600 megahertz, low voltage, 1.35 volt. So you got 8 gigs. I think it's going to be plenty for most people. And lastly, because some of these configurations are also sold with a conventional hard drive and a caching SSD drive, right over here it says SSD on the motherboard just to give you a little help, and it's an MSATA slot right there. Now my guess is going to be that the way BIOS is configured on this is it's only going to address that MSATA drive as a caching drive, since even when selling SSD configuration machines, they're going with the regular SATA for your main drive right here. But that's the internals. Now if you want to take this drive out, 7mm height slim drive, there are screws on the side, the usual 4 screws that hold the caddy on, and you can barely see the little guys right there, and there's a retainer right there as well. So if we unscrew this one right here, and that one is a normal Phillips head, looks like we should be able to get it out without having to take out the battery. But if you do have to take out the battery, it's not the end of the world either. There's a couple of screws that retain it there. There's another one there. And just disconnect it from the motherboard if needed. Be careful with that nice little connector. And then you can have at it. And here it is for the requisite comparison and beauty shot. This is the latest generation MacBook Air. 2 little wedge-shaped guys here. The Asus has more of a rounded look. Both put together with exquisite care, both metal machines, both very good looking. And there's our side view right there, so you can see what they look like. You're talking about just about the same footprint right there. The Asus has some little design differences. The lid is inset there with a couple of extra curves and lines. You know, just so you can't say, oh, they copied the MacBook Air. You'll probably still say that anyway, but that's okay. People always say that. Anyway, which machine should you pick? That's up to you. What do you want to run, Mac or Windows primarily? Because Macs are great running Mac OS. Love them to death. Windows, you don't get the same great drivers. You don't get the same battery life. It's a little bit less compelling. So if you're primarily a Windows person, I still say go with the Windows PC. If you're into Mac OS, which is just fine and awesome, then get yourself the Mac. One thing I will point out, and this happens, it's not so uncommon with Apple products, you're buying into the experience more than the specs. The MacBook Air runs on a nominally slower CPU. It still puts in very good performance though, and you have some nice Intel higher end graphics in here, but the display panel difference is key. Obviously there's no touch panel on a Mac laptop at this point. The OS just doesn't support it, but also this is a 1440 by 900 TN panel. Now it's one of the nicest TN panels you're going to see anywhere, but it's still TN, not IPS, versus 1920 by 1080. There you have it. All right, so now you've seen what the internals are like. You've learned everything that pretty much there is to know about this machine. You've seen the gratuitous comparison with the MacBook Air. So that's the Asus Zenbook UX303 LA. I definitely give this one a recommend, folks. So that's the Asus Zenbook UX303 LA. It's available now, $8.99 on Amazon, Newegg, BH Photo Video, a couple of other different places you can pick it up. The LN model is a bit harder to find, and again, it is $12.99, and that nets you NVIDIA GT 840M dedicated graphics and a higher resolution display. As you know, I have mixed feelings about that one, though. I'm Lisa from Mobile Tech Review. Be sure to visit our website for the full written review, and don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel.